Well, I want to welcome everyone back for another episode of The Founder's Journey. This is brought to you by the Tech Founder Circle. And I'm so excited about my next guest. He is a serial entrepreneur. He is also a tech genius. So his name is David Guttman. He created Superstruct and International, and he also does a meetup, Java JALA, and he's also CTO of a couple of different companies. And so I'm sure we'll get to all that stuff now. But let's just get right into it. David, tell me what got you to become a founder to begin with? Talk about that.
Yeah. Man, when I was in college, I read a book, Hackers and Painters by Paul Graham.
Okay.
And he kind of made this point in the book that I think that has always stuck with me. And it's interesting because I see it from the other side now, hiring a lot of engineers and people to work for me. But the point that he makes in the book is that, like, let's say that you are a software engineer and round numbers, you're getting paid $100,000 a year. Your boss is making more than $100,000 a year from you. Otherwise, they would fire you. There is some margin that you are leaving on the table. And especially if you are the type of person to work really hard, or, like, kind of give it your all, and you're curious and you're constantly figuring out things. You have what he would call the hacker mentality, where you can find these exploits and you can get like a lot of leverage, and increasing leverage. You can do even better, right? Because if you are working for your boss and you just give them 8 hours a day, but it's really hard to do, like, 8 hours for somebody else for something you don't care about. But if you were to put that time or more time and more effort into your own thing, not only are you making, that 50 to 75K margin that they were taking it for yourself, but you're probably doing even better. And you might even be able to get compounding interest off of that. And so any job that you think you'd be, making 100K from, well, it's not unreasonable that you could be turning that into 500K or more. And then obviously, he's a big fan of startups and, equity and bigger exits than you would ever have as like an employee selling your time. And I was convinced. And so when I wound up in an opportunity to do a tech startup with someone I met I joined a startup, and then when that one ended, I wound up starting a company with the CTO from that one, and gave it a good shot. And I've just always been interested in that leverage ever since. But I think I've also gotten a lot wiser to the trade-offs on the other side of the column. And
Yeah.
Paul Graham, he had his reasons for getting everybody interested in startups and wanting to do a startup. And I was much younger back when I was in college and more impressionable. And I think over time you realize that there are these costs on the other side, and it's not all upside.
Yeah. Yeah, with a lot of risk, there's time. I mean, we can do all kinds of things.
Yeah,
You people who's a founder's not had a massive loss, right? That's the reality. So, oh boy, we all understand that, don't we?
yeah.
So, well, tell me, biggest setback. Let's go right into that. Tell me what was
I don't know
when
if
you.
I'm just like primed because I just talked about that startup that I did back then. I guess that was the first startup that I co-founded. It was called Memel, so sort of a play on the word memes, but much more popular today. Memes are all over the place. But the I was very influenced by sites at the time. And God, it's an amazing. Is like Reddit is huge now, but at the time Reddit wasn't really well known. The it was Dig was much bigger than Reddit at the time. So I really liked the idea of social discovery. I was a big fan of there was another one called like Stumble Upon, and Pandora was really interesting at the time. The idea that you could have something that would learn from your preferences and show you new things. And so um again, it's so funny. It's like AI is huge now, but a lot
Yeah.
of these things were not really as mainstream
Kind
back
of cut the
then.
edge back then, huh? It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to build, sort of this, I guess to put it in, more current times. Yeah, this like AI powered Reddit, that you could have, you would suggest it, you'd feed it articles that you liked, and then it would learn from that. And then as it new things came out, it could share it with you. And then there was some, interesting ideas with like a, like virality is also, that's also been a huge thing, but more, virality in the sense of like, populations, so there were some interesting things there. Now, what I learned, and the reason why it was such a setback, and this has certainly colored how I think about startups and being a founder since, is that just having the idea that oh, people are going to like this and they're going to use it, and then it'll get popular, and then dot dot dot, I don't know, I'll sell it to Google. That's like not a good, that's not a good plan. And so now anytime I think about business, I always want to know what the revenue model is and what the story is, and just getting users is no longer enough for me, because that was really the hardest time I had back then. And I think it's just like a little naive, and maybe just what was going on at the time. And there's plenty of companies that do it that don't really have a good revenue plan, and they can get big and then they can get acquired or figure out how to turn on advertising or something like that. But that did not work for me at all. It did not work for me and my co-founder.
So you guys got a lot of volume, a lot of users, but not necessarily couldn't figure out how to monetize it, basically.
Yeah, and then it was really hard talking to investors. Some of them, could kind of get excited about it, but yeah, there was kind of no way to turn it into a real business. And so eventually then I wound up going in-house at companies doing R&D and data science and things like that, for a while. But yeah, that's the one that kind of comes closest to my mind at the moment.
So making sure you know how to monetize it, basically, is the bottom line for you. Yeah. So it's great ideas. You can't monetize them, aren't that great. That's what you're saying. Okay. And then I mean, like, if you were biggest success then since that experience, what do you say? Hey, what's been the
it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of things that I can think of as being very successful projects. For this show, I mean, I think we're talking to founders, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't really want to get into basically building what is now known as Disney.com, because that is like a very much like an in-house
but that's still a big deal. I think that's something that you could certainly be proud of.
True, but I almost feel like that is like the complete opposite of entrepreneurship, right? I mean, that is it's like kind of the opposite. I can also think of things like projects that I really enjoyed, that were much more artistic, and I don't know, more fun than profitable or long-term sustainable, so
and sometimes isn't that the most important? Like, I mean, we got to make money at the end of the day, of course, but don't you want to enjoy it when you're doing it? I mean, that's part of being the founder too. What do you think? Is you actually
okay, so I do, and I don't know if this is how I'm gonna always think about things, but this is the way that I've always, I think, handled my life, is that there's work and there's play, and maybe I'll figure out how to integrate them more and more. And I think that's something that I've done with Superstruct, my current company. But I like having like, this is where the money's coming from, and this is where I am helping. This is where I'm like helping other businesses. This is how like I'm helping them save time. I'm helping them make more money, and it's not a lot of fun. I mean, it's meaningful. I enjoy it. I like the people, but it's very different than, I'm just thinking about like, the one of the ones that came to mind is doing a concert with Yo-Yo Ma. So like creating artwork that is like real time reacting to music and doing a visual thing. Like that's just, it's much more like the art part of it. It's very cool. It's fun for the ego. It's like a little bit of this like celebrity performance thing, but I find like that's not my business. And a lot of people can make a ton of money. I mean, we know plenty of celebrities that are
Yeah.
performance oriented,
Yeah.
and oftentimes they have huge teams around them, and those are businesses. But that's something that I've always stayed away from, and I think I will always stay away from. There's a saying that there's two ways to make money. You can help people save time, or you can help them waste time. And I find entertainment to be a lot of fun. I think we all do. And in some sense, I think that, you know, if I don't know, if I really hit it big and I like super duper had fuck you money, I would, sorry. I would yeah, I would want to make video games or something like that. But there's this other part of me that thinks I've outgrown that, and there's more meaning to helping people. And I think there's a little bit of a tension in me where it's like I don't find that fun, but I find it meaningful. But as I got older, like the meaning is more important than the fun. And I think I've strayed quite a bit from your question, but in my mind, I think the more fun projects burn brighter. But those aren't over time. I think I've gravitated more and more away from them. And so, you know, the successes, I think they feel a little bit different. They're less personal. They more belong to other people, if that makes sense. And so I think it's harder for me to think of them as my own successes compared to the fun stuff, but I guess they're bigger and more meaningful, but they tend to belong to people I was working with or things like that.
Okay. So, you know, maybe some lessons learned in this process on the fence thing. What do you think?
Lessons learned in this process. It's interesting. A lot of where my attention has gone over the years has been this transition from an engineer, like the technical mindset, building everything myself, to how to run teams, and lead people to creating things instead of just being that person myself. And I'm still capable of it. I still really enjoy it. You know, one of my projects that I built recently that a lot of people get value out of it, you know, it's called Rambly. It's definitely a fitting project for the pandemic times, where it's actually allowed, you know, you mentioned my meetup, JSLA. So before the pandemic, JSLA was quite big. It was a monthly event. Sometimes, you know, we would have over 200 people at our events, like, you know, filling up the big auditorium, like when we would host at Google and things like that. Speakers, you know, we'd have from all over the world. And then of course, pandemic hit, and I wanted to continue having the events. And so I wound up building a, you know, what you might call like a spatial audio, like event space. And so it behaves like a video game, like you know, an old Nintendo game. You can walk around as your character, and it uses your microphone. And so if anybody's characters are standing around you as you're talking, they can hear you. And if they walk away from you, they can hear you less and less because you're farther away. There's also an issue with I'm in tangent territory again, but while we're talking about it, so there's an issue with Zoom that I'm sure a lot of people noticed, which is that the way that the echo prevention works is very few people can talk at the same time. You know, one person starts talking and then everyone else's mic can get cut, and so you can't really have the same level of like organic conversations that you can at a cocktail party or a networking event or anything like that. People talking over each other is a very natural form of conversation among friends and informal settings, which is really what you want in that networking environment. You want to be very friendly. In a formal business environment, you tend to want one person talking, everybody listening, taking turns. And so Zoom works really well for that. And so the way that Rambly was built is that a lot of people can talk at the same time. You can kind of overhear other conversations that are near your character. You can just move away during the course of a conversation and go join another conversation circle if you hear what they're talking about. And so something like that was extremely fun for me to build. It was very useful for my events. For other people, they were continuing to host meetups and conferences. They got a lot of value out of it. But almost all of my attention does not go into my own projects anymore. Almost all of my attention now goes into helping founders build software engineering teams. So finding engineers that are well suited to the things that they want to build, engineers who can prove that that's the type of work that they can do, and also setting up the process and the systems for those engineers to be effective, especially when working remote and having distributed teams, because without a doubt, that is the most cost-effective way to build any software these days, especially compared to trying to find a local engineer in the US. I mentioned 100K as a rounding, round number before, but that is extremely low for how much a good software engineer in the US would cost, compared to, you can get a great one in other countries for 30 or 40K a year full time. And so giving founders a way to do that in a scalable, effective, like non-problematic way is really how I spend a lot of my time. And how to do that has been really interesting, like how teams work, how communication works, especially dealing with founders and thinking a lot about common issues that they have. I think it's very common for founders to be almost afraid of their developers, especially the less technical they are, like the less they want to sound stupid in front of the developers, the less they want to say something that gets their developer annoyed and then quits, and then, oh God, they have to find another developer, and then, oh, such a pain finding the first one, or, oh, my developer says we have to like rebuild everything from scratch because it's all legacy code. Like, I guess I have to do it. Things of those nature is a lot more of what I think about these days as well.
So, and as far as then a pitfall that you would say for somebody in your spot, would you say, hey, I'm going there, what would you tell them? A pitfall that keeps, if someone's going down their road, what would you tell them to avoid?
Sorry, for a founder working with like software engineers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think for founders working with software engineers, or I guess a really common one is that a founder would work with an agency or a dev shop to build either the MVP or the actual product. The biggest pitfall that you can wind up in that case is that once the agency or the dev shop has been working with you for a while, their engineers are the ones that have built up all of your institutional knowledge. They know how your app works, they know all the details, and all of that has gone into their engineers. Those are not your engineers. And if you wind up in a situation, which can often happen, is that dev shop will start getting slow. They could get less and less communicative. And what's happening is they have you more and more over a barrel, because your choice is, either you keep getting work done, albeit more slowly and less well as you had hoped, or you fire them. But if you fire them, you're firing your entire dev team all at once. And usually what happens is then you go to another dev shop and then they tell you, oh, this is all crap, like we can't work with this, we have to start from scratch. And then the whole circle of life continues. And I think that's a very dangerous pattern. And one of the things that I think is most important is to make sure that you are maintaining that institutional knowledge, and it is your people that have that. And while firing people is something that I think a lot of people are afraid of firing people. I don't think you should be afraid of firing individuals, as long as you are maintaining that institutional knowledge. If somebody isn't working out, what you want to do is you want to replace that one person while you have everyone else to get them up to speed. And then, if anybody else needs to go, like this one at a time, like redundancy. And that's impossible with dev shops. It's all or nothing. They are all gone. Anybody who knew where how the whole thing worked and any idiosyncrasies of your platform or your app. Like that's all things that are going to have to be rediscovered. You're going to, your new team is going to have to rediscover how to make fire, and that is very, very problematic. And so I would be very careful about hiring dev shops or agencies, but if you are going to do it, you may want to overpay for a trusted consultant, even if they are very expensive, not to do any development, but to periodically check in and oversee the development, and to act as that like inside observer, having this record of how it's done. So if another team ever does come in, you do have a little bit of that transition. I think even better is to hire somebody like that to help you find engineers that are good enough to work with directly, that are your own engineers, that you wouldn't have to, like, if something goes wrong, you don't replace them all at once, nor do you have a middleman that is trying to, that is taking a tax, or that, would eventually have you over a barrel.
Okay. All right. So last thing is, I always ask a book that maybe a life-changing book, or a book that made a difference for you, that you recommend. So what do you recommend and why?
So yeah, it was interesting. I was actually at a dinner party last night, and the subject of books came up, and the one that I recommended, I think, is just one that is just generally applicable to almost everything, which is Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't matter what you're doing or what you're working on, but kind of effectively where that title comes from is that you can constantly make small improvements to any kind of process. So your own life, how you do things, and even just that 1% improvement, if it's compounding, makes a gigantic difference. And so in the course of our lives, you can accumulate good habits or you can accumulate bad habits. And if you know how those work, you maintain, you can create a lot of leverage. And I think it also extends beyond just ourselves, knowing that psychology of how triggers work and rewards. That's really effective for leading teams and making your organization, beyond you, effective and to grow more effective.
All right. Well, I love that book too. I think that's a great one to choose. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say, David, it's been a pleasure. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way is superstruct.com. So that's that's my company where I help founders build software. So if you go there, it should have my contact info. Also, David Guttman is sure you just put that into Google and you find me. davidguttman.com, David Guttman on Twitter, David Guttman on GitHub. Whatever your speed is, I'm sure you'll be able to find me that way.
Sounds good. Well, hey, thanks so much, David. You take care.
Thanks, Michael. Bye.